thank you so much for joining me. We have almost kind of climbing up towards 300 people today on this webinar. So again, thank you so much for spending your time. So regarding the poll, really interesting results. Kind of an even split between less than 1 hour a week and about 1 to 20 hours a week. So people do spend a good amount of time documenting their work. 1% said that's all I do, and 11% said what's documenting work. So hopefully this will be useful to you. So let's get going with our presentation. So first off, just want to kind of set the expectation of who this webinar is for. It's mostly for Power BI developers and consultants, but generally it's for the audience that's familiar with Power BI Desktop, and basically anybody who is interested in general BI project documentation. We're going to talk a lot about some generic things. In terms of documentation and requirements. We're going to talk about some Power BI specific things on how, what features are included in the tool. And we're going to basically just briefly touch on some of the other additional tools for documenting your work. Okay. Now, a little bit about me. Like I mentioned, I'm a senior consultant here at Pragmatic Works. I have about 20 years of different, kind of spend a lot of time in different roles in business analytics, supply chain management, done a lot of project management, data analytics and consulting. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn if you'd like. I've included the link here on the slide, or via email. I do have certification in BI from Microsoft and in Azure certification. I'm a member of PMI. It's a Project Management Institute. And in my previous career, I was a business analyst, so I kind of come from the business side of things. All right, so let's talk about our agenda for today. So it's very simple. We're just going to talk about kind of like 4 different things. Why do we need to document? Why bother, right? How to do that appropriately, and like I mentioned, we're going to look at inside some of the Power BI desktop features and the documentation and some of the other tools. In the interest of time, I would request that you either put your questions in a kind of a chat box in the questions box in this webinar, or hold them to the end, and we'll leave some time at the end, to answer some of those questions. And Crystal was going to help me with that. Thank you, Crystal. All right, so let's get things started here. Just a quick cartoon. I love Dilbert, so every chance I get, I throw a Dilbert cartoon out there, right? So Victor quit. Who needs to take? I need you to take over the project. Is there any documentation? No, but some sort of glowing box. Can you finish it by Monday? Yes, if it's a nightlight, I can finish it by today. So obviously. One of the prime reasons for documentation is just, if somebody leaves a job, or if somebody, if you need to turn things over to other people, it's the easiest way to get them started or get them going. But like the 3 most important things I want to talk about is the reason for why we're documenting is. Basically, if we do not have a functional specification document, it is the single biggest unnecessary risk in a software project. Now, you may ask me, what is a functional spec? It's a document that describes how a product will work entirely from the user's perspective. Kind of talks about the menus, the dialogues, the features of a product. It is the single most important thing in designing the product. And as tempting as it is to, quote unquote, get into the code without identifying software requirements, generally, if it's more than 1 week of coding or requires more than one programmer or developer, don't do it. Just stay away, right? Basically, without a functional spec, you will always spend more time and create lower quality solution. And so let's talk about some of the reasons for that, right? The spec forces you, it kind of forces you to think through the design of the program. And thinking through the design raises questions. It forces you to go get answers from the people, right? They either know the answers or most likely in the best position to think through the answers, either by themselves or by the committee. So speaking about the committee, we almost always need multiple parties to design the product that the customers would want to buy or use. And this involves the customers themselves, right? The architects, the engineers. It's a team effort. And the time invested up front in documenting those requirements will save a lot of expensive time rewriting the code. And when the product is designed in human language, it doesn't take much to iterate on different design solutions, process possibilities, and improvements. Otherwise, we're going to get attached to our code, right? I mean, we love our code, and no matter if it fits the purpose of the solution of the customer or not. The second reason, as I am outlining here, it saves a lot of time in communicating. Everybody on the team can read the spec. You know, QA people can test against and how it's supposed to work. The developers read it to know what code to write. The marketing people do what they do. You know, the sales people, they get the investors on board, and not to mention the customers, right? Who can make sure they're getting the product they want to pay for. And that's ultimately kind of a make or break situation. And the third most important reason, it is really impossible to estimate how long things are going to take. And almost everywhere, right? You just have to know how things are going to take, because developing a product costs money. So how can a responsible business decide whether to build a product or not without knowing how much it will cost, right? So please make sure you have a functional spec before you design your technical specification. So just to shout out there for a functional spec, make sure it's there. I mean, it's outside of the scope of this webinar, but it's generally a very, very good idea to have before you get started with your technical documentation. All right, let's move on. Again, another kind of funny cartoon out here. But why are we documenting, right? It helps users kind of understand the flow of the data, like how it flows from the original source of record to the destination. And basically, when developers or QA folks look at the origin and purpose of different tables, and they kind of look at the queries, what transformations are being made, how you set up your relationships, how have you set up your measures, what are they calculating? But most importantly, and I can't stress this enough, it's about the conversation, right? You start a conversation with a customer, and you start a dialogue about, oh, is this the right data? Is this does it look correct? Does it not look correct? Why? You get the SMEs involved, and ultimately it drives the solution adoption. The more involvement you get from the change management perspective, the more involvement you get from your SMEs, the more likelihood of success is going to be. They get ownership of the solution. You're sort of building it together, and documentation helps a lot with that. All right, so let's talk about some of those questions that you need to answer. So it's the who, what, when, why, and where, right? So in terms of the who, you know, you need to ask yourself, is this for a VP? Is this for a functional manager? Is this for other report developers? Who am I writing this for, right? Could be the business members of the team, or the SMEs, or the analysts. Is very important. It kind of level sets the expectation for the document. And what needs to be documented? Like what does your client need in terms of deliverables? Is it a high level technical requirements document? Do they need to go into details? And then why, right? So we're going to talk about this later, but I like to follow the kind of the user story example of, so you identify a role in this documentation scope, so that specific role can easily understand or validate your model, for example, as far as when, right? Do we need to document as we go? Do we need to do it at the end? And where does it need to be documented in terms of, can it be documented in the tool? Can we do it in other places? You know, think about, can we automate the process of documentation, right? So getting the answers to all these questions will help you determine how to document, and that's what we're going to talk about next. All right. As we discussed before, get to know your SMEs, subject matter experts. Most likely, they are the ones who possess the most current business intelligence, and they can either provide intrinsic knowledge that is not documented anywhere, or point you to the most updated documentation that already exists somewhere. In terms of, and then to avoid any kind of duplication in your documentation efforts, Find out if there's any existing artifacts. Is there an existing business or technical documentation that falls under the scope of your reporting solution? This will definitely give you a head start and help avoid duplicity in your documentation efforts. It also helps to kind of step outside a little bit and think ahead, right? And discuss your future needs for your documentation. Is the model that I'm building going to grow? Is it going to inform other data analytics efforts? This will help you, tie some of the loose ends and focus on where might your solution go. All right. Let's talk about some of the other things. So here I'm citing Paul Turley's blog, and I borrowed some of the things from his effort here. But you have to look at the kind of the project type, right? So there are formal projects, there are informal projects, and there are hybrid projects. So formal projects are typically well-scoped, funded, staffed, multiple members of the team. They're executed in the collaboration with the business and the IT folks and perhaps the data owners. Informal projects are kind of the other end of the spectrum, right? They're executed by the business users there, and they're usually ad hoc. It's just kind of spur of the moment. The data sets are typically not governed, and reports are not being certified. And so all of that is a consideration for how much documentation you can do and at what level, right? And then the hybrid projects, obviously, is anything in between. So that's one consideration. The other one is really the project size. Are you working on it by yourself? Is there a team, other non-technical members of the team that you have to adhere to in terms of your documentation efforts? And another consideration is, we kind of discussed it in the earlier slide, but project longevity. Is this a proof of concept? Is this a prototype? Are we piloting this, or is this a minimum viable product that we're going to throw out to the entire customer audience, right? And make sure that we test it for viability and we test it for whether customers would want to pay for this product. All right. And so in having analyzed all that, right, I personally like to use that user story kind of model. So as a role, I need to document, there's a particular documentation requirement coming in there, and so that I can benefit. So 3 reasons for that, right? It keeps your documentation requirements role-centric. There's not somebody who can walk into your project and say, it would be nice to have this. It's like, okay, who are you? What is your role in this project? Okay, so this is still a legitimate requirement. So let's write this down and let's make sure it's prioritized accordingly, right? And it keeps your scope and your priorities in check, and provides that governance on your project and your features. And then it identifies traceability and expectations. If somebody said something, we don't need to try to remember who said that and when. It's documented right there, and we will get to it when the priority says we should get to it, right? All right, so the next thing, what's the key word here, right? So everything that I've talked about is the balance, right? You don't document for the sake of documenting, but at the same time, you don't ignore the documentation for all these reasons that we talked about. All right, so let's see, we're at about 20 minutes into the webinar. I'm gonna go ahead and open it up for questions on this before we jump into demo. Crystal, are there any questions so far in the chat?
Hey, no, I don't see any so far.
Okay. Well, let's give folks maybe a few seconds before I kind of prep the demo.
Someone's asking, could we see a sample spec doc? And then someone else says, can we have you guys will have the recording sent to you guys tomorrow. I think that's Aaron asking about the PowerPoint. But yeah, that's someone else. There's a couple coming in. Let's see. Do you have an example of what the functional design doc should look like?
Okay, yes. What I will do is I will make sure to provide the links to some of the samples. You know, the functional spec and the technical spec are themselves are sort of outside the scope of this, but and you can write them in many different ways. But yeah, I will definitely include some of the links.
Someone else asked, will you be discussing documentation tools such as Power BI, Helper?
Yes, what we'll do is first we'll jump into Power BI desktop and take a look at some of those features next. And we're not going to discuss the other tools in detail. I will spend a little bit of time on DAX Studio, and I will provide the names and the links to some of the other documentation tools out there, including Power BI Helper. Okay. All right, so I have my, let's jump into the demo. So I have my Northwind database here, Northwind Power BI solution ready to go. So I've created some of the, I kind of threw this really quickly together. Doesn't have anything fancy in terms of measures or visualizations. But what I wanted to do is kind of start with a flow of designing the solution and where you can put the documentation. So the point is really to kind of show you how to keep your work organized, and it's a big part of the documentation, and how to build the documentation right into the tool. Sort of write the metadata once and use it everywhere. Okay, so the first thing that you do is you probably spend a lot of time in Power Query, right? So you go to transform data, and as you can see, we want to spend a little bit of time on just organizing your work here. So all of the source data, and this is kind of a Northwind database here that I'm connected to, a sample database. What I usually do is I just write, SRC for source, and you're not going to see any transformations in here except for source and navigation. So all the queries here are in the native form, and anybody coming into this tool will see that all of these are under source folder, and there's nothing happening to them. All the transformations will be happening kind of in the staging folder. So basically, the best practice on that is to create a reference table, right? And see, all of these are basically they're not enabled to load, right? So they're there, but they're disabled on the load. And so, for example, this Northwind employees table is a reference to the Northwind employees in the source. So these ones I called stage. I also hide them, meaning they're not included and they're not enabled in load. But the staging is where the most of the play is going to happen, right? So we're renaming the columns, we're removing the columns, we're doing all sorts of transformations, merging queries, and kind of getting them to the shape that we need them for to load into our model. And then finally, again, we make another reference query. So for example, the product, as you can see, is a reference query of Northwind products, and that one is enabled to load, and that's ultimately that's how it ends up in the model. Again, under dimensions and facts. So again, I haven't like perfected this yet, but that's kind of the basics of how you organize it. All right. Well, now let's actually go through some of those documentation. So M is a language of Power Query. It's a self-documented language. So for example, let's just take one of the kind of more complex staging tables here with a few transformations. All right, so this one, like every step you take, every transformation in this query is self-recorded. So that's good, right? You don't have to do anything there. Anybody who would come in and say, okay, yeah, here they remove the columns, they rename some columns, here they merge some of the queries. One of good practices is to, instead of just saying rename columns, rename it into something meaningful, right? So in this case, it's rename product name. So it's in clear and concise language. The other thing you can do here also is for this particular, as you go along, and for this particular query, which then becomes a table here, we can go and say, okay, this table, you can put when you click on all properties, you can put a description of this table, right? And I'll show you where it ends up in the other Power BI view. But I just put like sample, this is the product dimension, right? And some of the other features that are, Power Query doesn't have a lot of places you can put descriptions, but I try to kind of harvest some of those that are available. You can also add comments to your code, right? So if you want to go into an advanced editor, you can comment things out here. So it's a double / or backward slash, I can't remember, and put this is the source, right? So if somebody were to examine your code, you can kind of have the documentation in here. And let's see. Now, another very useful feature that not many people are aware of is when you go, you can look at your query dependencies. I really enjoy that feature and I like that. If you go into the View tab here on the ribbon and you click on Query Dependencies, you can quickly kind of see, and I like a different layout actually. I like mine from left to right. And you can enlarge that and you can see, okay, so from this database, these are my source tables, which then feed into some of these, I'm not moving all the tables into the model, but some of these feed into my staging tables and then ultimately into my model tables. So that's a really good feature. You could print it out, you could send it to somebody, screenshot it. All right, so that's it for the Power Query side. So we're gonna close that and take a look at some of the other views here. So in Power BI, you have obviously 3 views kind of in the main window here. So you have a report view, which you see right now. You have the table view, and then the data view they call it, and they have the model view. Discard these changes. All right, so we're gonna go take a look at the model view first because I think it's the most useful in terms of adding documentation. So the properties pane, that's where most of the magic is going to happen, so to speak. You can add the descriptions of measures and tables here. So for example, if we have a products table, and here's where you can see that the description that I've added in the Power Query, it transferred here, but you can also add it here. It's interchangeable. So here's where you can add different descriptions of tables and measures. So I did create a separate DAX measures table. You can see that here, and if you have a question how to do that, there's plenty of videos out there. But basically, you create a measure, you add it to this, you create a new table via enter data. Then once you move the measure to this table, you can delete that extra column there, and you just do these, and it turns into kind of a measure table, right? And the nice thing about this is it keeps all the measures at the top and all the other tables kind of below it, so you can quickly see here. But let's go back to our the data view or model view for a second. So you can also add display folders. So for example, if there's a bunch of customer measures, right, that I'm doing, I can organize it this way, right? You can create subfolders inside the table. So, and if I add a description that kind of helps inform. If we go back to our report view, and if we hover over customers, let's see, customers, here we go. It will tell us exactly what we typed in here. And you know, you can type the logic for the measure, you can do kind of many things. So let's just finish up on this model view here. So we kind of went over the descriptions, we went over the display folders, we went over in terms of how to organize your star schema here. This isn't exactly a perfect star schema, but you know, I like to have my dimensions at the top. It clearly tells you which are the dimensions, which are the fact tables. And you can also do perspectives, right? You can select, you know, if the model gets too complex, there's just too many tables and you just want to share kind of one piece of it, you can add it to perspective, and you know, you can have like a subset of your model for easier description. So we're not going to spend too much time on that today. And then also you could, let's see, let's jump over into report view. So besides creating the measure tables like we've done here, yeah, you can do such things as page tooltips to describe certain things. So here I've done one. So for example, if this is a sales measure, right? I hover over it and it tells me exactly what that is and how that's calculated and where that comes from. So you can use tricks like that. So for that, I just created a separate page. I think Reed Havens has Havens Consulting has a very good description on how to do that. But it gives you more of a kind of a custom ability to show specifically, especially to the report users, right? That they don't necessarily have, you know, access to all these other features and what exactly this number is and where that comes from. Okay. So as a developer, if you are, let's just say we have some simple measures here, you have the ability to add comments into your DAX code, right? You can either put a double dash and this is a comment, or you can comment out. This is a really interesting trick. So if you have some more code to write here, or perhaps you wanted to test a measure, right? And let's say you don't like this code and really you want to test something else. One good shortcut here that I use is Control KC to comment it out. It comments out the whole line. And this is a great time-saving feature. You can comment out multiple rows and you know, you don't have to do row by row. And then to go back to uncomment is Control KU. So if you hold Control and just press KU in sequence, it will uncomment that line of code. All right. So we're gonna delete that. Okay. So let's see. That's all I wanted to talk about in terms of what metadata as far as documentation is involved inside of the Power BI desktop tool. Now, in terms of documenting the model itself and the semantic model and the metadata and extracting things out of your data sets, there are a number of good tools to do that. So we are going to switch gears right now and kind of jump into that. So the first thing I wanted to show you is DAX Studio. So Crystal, let's see if we have any questions so far before I launch the next tool here.
Let me look here. Let me see. We got quite a bit of questions. Let's see if I can. Someone said, when you have reference tables like you showed, are they taking up additional space memory in your Power BI model?
They're not, because let's go back there. That's a good question. What's happening here is they're not being loaded into the model, right? Because if you can see here, it's the load is not enabled, and they're basically sitting there as queries, but they're not being loaded. And if you reference, in the staging, and then you reference, the only thing that's being loaded is when you right-click on a query, and if it says enable load, that's the one that's loaded. And the nice part about it is this is a cleaned up version of the table that you want to load into your model. It's, again, best practice is to only add columns that you are going to use, because every column kind of costs the size. So that's the answer to this question, I think.
Another question is, do we need applications other than Power BI? Oh, wait, we did that one already. Hold on. The next question is, should we do this practice type of renaming and ETL things here, or first create a data flow and do there and then use data flow in data set?
Yeah, that's a very good question, right? The answer is it depends. Right? It depends on what you already have in your environment. If there's some data flows that you need to use, then by all means use them. A lot of times you don't have the luxury of having that, and especially in a smaller kind of exploratory type of project where you just want to quickly put together a proof of concept. You usually end up with something like this, and then replacing some of these data sources with data flows as you go along and develop that. Anything else?
You got a few more. You want to take a couple more?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
By using reference so often, does not put a heavy load on the refresh process?
It does not. There's a couple of different things. You can duplicate, right, a query, or you can reference it. Very rarely I use duplicate. I mean, maybe there's other use cases that you guys know how to, in terms of using duplicate. But duplicate basically replicates a query, and it literally runs the same exact query twice, right? When you reference it, it just kind of references the end result of the query in verbatim, and just kind of carries it over. So this query is just kind of loading the table from the source. This query references and does some additional transformation, right? And then this query basically, again, just references the end result of the staging query where you perform transformations. Right, should we do one more?
Yeah, let's do one more. Another question is, how does creating multiple table references, sources, staging model, etc. in the Power BI query that file size? Does the duplication increase the size massively?
I think we already addressed that question. The tables that are not loaded, they don't really add to the size of the model. So just make sure that these are not loaded. The load is disabled. Otherwise, you'll end up with every additional table that you add, is going to basically duplicate the size of that table. All right. Okay. Thank you guys for your questions. Let's go ahead and move into the DAX Studio demo. So I'm going to launch DAX Studio here, and it automatically kind of picks up on the fact that I have my Power BI SSDT model, the PBIX file open, and we're going to go ahead and connect to it. And you can see immediately on the left-hand side on the metadata panel, here's kind of the name of our database, the name of our file, and under the model here, it picks up basically all of the tables, right, in the metadata pane. So you can see your metadata, you can see your functions, and you can see they call them DMVs, which stands for Dynamic Management Views tabs. And what you want to do is, if you want to document your measures, you go to DMV tab, and you can just type MD schema measures, and just double click on that. It'll create a select all statement from that particular DMV. And then if you just hit run, it gives you kind of this nice, nice view here in the results of everything that pertain. We get a list of basically all the measures that are in this model. And you can extract it. I think if you add the advanced tab, I'm not sure if it's there by default, but you can definitely turn it on in the file menu here in the options somewhere. Oh yeah, here it is. Export all data button. It's like, anyway, I can't remember where it is, but somewhere you can turn it on if you don't have it. And yeah, okay, so here's the export data button, and you can export this to a CSV file or SQL Server table, and anytime that should suffice in terms of describing what your measures are in this data model. And then if you want to, as far as documenting your tables, let me clear this out here. You can basically do the same thing. You can search for DB schema and tables and run that. Here are all the tables that you have in this model. And there's some system generated stuff which you probably are not going to need, but here's a date created, date modified, and the name of the table, all that kind of good stuff. So like I said, DAX Studio is a very good tool for sort of extracting the data from Power BI, PBIX file. And there's a bunch of other tools. So I'm just gonna switch over to what they are. Let me see. I haven't really tested them extensively, but I can speak to some of them. So we've looked at the DAX Studio. Tabular Editor is an excellent tool. Mainly it's by Daniel Atikir. Hope I pronounced his name correctly. And it is used and recommended by a lot of people. What I found, it's mainly for manipulating data. I mean, there are some definitely reporting functions you can use it for. There's obviously the SQL Server Management Studio. If you have a license, or if you have a free license, it's kind of a heavy tool, I would say. A couple of tools I'd like to mention that are online and they're more enterprise grade is Data Visioner. You can search for that one, and Power BI Sentinel. They are paid for tools. You can try them out. I don't know if anybody had a experience working with them, but seems like more of a enterprise grade tools. There's some of the kind of a more lightweight tools. Somebody mentioned Power BI. There's Power BI Cleaner, there's Power BI Assistant, there's Power BI Helper. Just about any kind of noun here used with Power BI, and there's Power BI Service Documenter. Some of these are very useful and kind of like show you the model in a more of a graphical form, especially this Power BI. Let's see, I think it was Power BI Service Documenter. But again, we don't have enough time to go over like all of them in terms of the scope of this webinar. But go ahead and take this list, use them, play around with them. Be interesting to know in the comments of if you guys watch the webinar and if you've used any of them and what you found useful. So let's I think that concludes the presentation part of it. So I just want to briefly go over what we talked about today, right? So we discussed why we document, in the fact that it drives adoption of your project, of your model. It helps those who inherit your work, right? In terms of how to document, we talked about how important is planning and some of the considerations you should look at before you start your documentation efforts. And obviously the functional requirements are very important before you start any efforts in development, not just documentation, but in terms of development. We talked about some of the internal Power BI documentation capabilities and metadata that you can use and where to put that. We looked at DAX Studio for a couple of different things and kind of give you the list of all the other tools that I found out there that are useful. Yeah, I'm gonna open it up for questions for a few minutes here. Crystal, help me with that.
Yeah, let's see. Let's go from where we left off here. Okay, someone said, can you explain what enable load does in Power Query? Like, what is the difference whether the source is enabled or not?
Yeah, so enable load is so if you look at this here, right, the way we organize it between source and staging, so all of these tables are, well, except for these three, so anything that's not, if you can see this in italics, right, that means that it's not going to load these queries into the model. So as you can see, these three, I haven't moved them here because I haven't finished my transformation process, but I could have as well like moved them down here, right? Let's just be puristic here. And so all of these tables, or I would say queries, they do have enable load, so they will end up in the model. So when you hit close and apply, right, you're gonna see, do you have any questions? No, it's basically reapplying those changes because I moved them from one folder to another, but nothing's going to change structurally. So let's just give it a minute here. So the only tables that will load into the model are the tables that are basically have enable load on them. So if you go back here, I mean, the only tables you will see in the model are those non-italicized tables. So if you have enable load, that's the one you want in the model. It's a cleaned up table that goes into the model that you can write your measures on. You know, hopefully that answers the question.
All right, next question. Salman, yes, the recording will be available tomorrow around noon. So you guys should just receive a link in your email for that. The next question after that is, you can also use control and together to comment code in your DAX formulas, and the same key press will remove the comment. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Great. That's why I love these webinars. You get good feedback from the audience. Thank you. It's a great comment. Control and backslash, I guess.
How do you comment multiple rows at once?
Yeah, so let's go take a look at that. Just look at some of the, I mean, I just have the basic, let's see, do I have something more? Okay, so here's a good example, right? So I was messing around with some code here, for example, right? And you just select them. So if you hold shift, or you can use your mouse too, right? So you can select the 3 rows of code and do KU to uncomment or KC to comment, and a huge time saver. So that's how you do multiple at once.
Right. The next question is, you got a few more here. The next question is, how did you get your DAX measures all in one place?
Okay. So I'm going to show you kind of a quick example. So the measures, by definitions, it's just a metadata, right? It just kind of tells you what to do with, you know, with your semantic model, and they have to live somewhere. They have to be in a table. So let's go ahead and create like another measures table just for demonstration purposes. So for example, I'm in, you know, let's just pretend we don't have this DAX measures table, and I'm in the customers table, and I want to basically just create a new measure, and I want to maybe count the cities or something, right? All right, so I'm gonna close this Power Query so it doesn't get in our way. All right, so now we have a new measure called cities, and I can I just throw it on my visualization here. So we have 91 cities. Now I do want to keep all my measures together, so I'm going to go ahead and create a table, and the way to do that is just the quickest and easiest way, just enter data. And I want to call this table new measures, right? And I'm just going to load it. I don't even need to do anything. I just name the table something that I want to name it, and it's going to kind of like feed it back almost to Power Query and then feed it back in here. So in a second, we should see our new measures table. So it's going to be a table just like any other, unless you kind of turn it into this table with this type of icon, like a measure table. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. It should just have one column in it. It says column 1. And then so what you need to do is you need to readdress. So if you click on this measure that we just created, see how it's home table under customers now. You just change it to your new measures table, literally, that we just created, and boom, it moves it down here, right? So now what you can do is you don't need this column 1, obviously. So you just delete that column. I'll let it process. All right. And then what you do is you just hide the fields pane and you reopen it again. And boom, we have this new measures measure table, so to speak, with our new cities measure right underneath it. And same thing, you can move between these two tables. You can move measures around. Like if you don't want the employees under our DAX measures, customer measures folder, you can just move it under a different table, under a new measures table, and you can see here it just moved down. Okay, so it's just a matter of how you want to organize your measures. Some of the projects that I worked on have like literally hundreds and hundreds of measures that just build on top of each other. It gets very hard to manage. So your friends here are the search bar. Obviously, you can look for anything cities. Like I know here's my measure cities, right? Just decide on how you want to organize it. You can have several measure tables like we just created. Like there's the DAX measures, there's new measures tables, and even within the table, then you can have folders or subfolders of measures, underneath in several of them. So you can kind of manage it that way. Yeah, hopefully that answers that question. Crystal, I think we have time for maybe one or two more.
Okay, yeah, no problem. Let me look in here. Someone's asking, is it possible to incorporate contextual links to the documentation, wiki, SharePoint?
Yes. In fact, let me kind of show you one thing I forgot to mention. So there is things here. You can insert a bunch of stuff into Power BI desktop. You can put text box shapes. You can also link them to a lot of different things. So for example, here what I did is I put let's see, I think I put the button here. It's called help, right? And what I've done is let me just kind of demonstrate that. So I turn the action on here, and you can put any type of like, okay, this is a Q&A, but you can select a bookmark or a web URL. I think that was the core of the question. You can put a web URL here. If you change your web URL, you just put that over here in the wiki, and you put a tooltip. When you hover over it, it'll tell you URL. Let's just try that out, right? I can spell that. Okay, so you hover over it, it says the tooltip, right? When you click on it, it'll take you to this if it take you to this web URL. But in this case, what I've done is I've put the Q&A here, and this kind of goes back to sort of make it easier on your users. The more contextual stuff they have, the less time they spend on asking additional questions or trying to chase someone down. But if you click on this one, for example, since I've linked it to a Q&A, it has this function of, okay, well, I don't know what this 1.35 million is. Let me just ask a question. So that's that Q&A feature in Power BI that it has. So I'll just start typing, right, and then it'll kind of tell me by invoice, or it'll try to guess at what you're after, right? And then it can even predict and see what visualizations you kind of want to see by unit in a different type of visualization. So it's just one kind of like open-ended. If you're trying to not follow the best practices and not build it to a spec, you can kind of leave some open-ended things here in your model. But I think to answer your question, yes, you can build things like URLs in here by just picking web URL and typing it in, putting a tooltip and whatnot. Okay. Crystal, I think maybe one more, or what do you think? 3 more minutes we have?
If you want to, yeah, we can probably do one more. We'll do one more.
Sure.
And we'll close it out. Okay, will a summary be posted on Power BI Yammer group? Listening.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Good one.
I'm digging. I'm like, let me dig in here. Okay. What if you have a Python script visual? What do we document in Power Query? When do we use the Azure ML, and what do we have to document?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'll be honest with you. I don't know the answer to that one. I think let me get back to you on that one. So the Python script, I'm just gonna write it down. So the Python, Crystal, can you repeat that? So the Python script and Azure ML documentation for Python scripting?
Yes.
Okay.
It says, what if I have a Python script visual? What do we document in Power Query? When do we use Azure ML, and what do we do, and what do we have to document? Excuse me.
Gotcha. All right. I got it down, and we will go ahead and find an answer for you, and we'll try to attach it to the recording of this webinar.
Yes.
All right.
All right. Yeah, we can close it out. Let's close it out. Well, Karel, thank you so much for hosting this webinar. I know everybody has enjoyed it. As usual, thank you to everybody who has attended. I hope you guys have a good rest of your Tuesday. You guys will receive the recording to this webinar in your email box around noon or 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. If for any reason, if you guys missed the link or don't have it, please feel free to go onto our YouTube page under free training playlist and look it up there. Again, thank you so much for hosting, and thank you guys so much for attending. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Stay safe, and just let us know if you guys have any questions or concerns. We'll be here to help. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.